We all know how the events of April 18th, 1775 shaped our nation's history. But what actually happened to the church after? Well, it was earlier that day, on April 18th, that our second rector, the Reverend Dr. Mather Byles, resigned or was fired from his position, depending on whom you ask. He was a staunch loyalist, having sworn an oath of loyalty to the king, as all Anglican clergy did. Once fighting broke out the next day, the church was closed for 3 years. While a significant portion of the congregation was sympathetic to the patriot cause, an equally significant portion was loyalist. You can imagine how difficult it would have been to come together for worship when the community was so torn. Eventually, those who maintained loyalty to the king fled, either north to Canada or to England. The Church of England was so decimated by the war in New England that only a few Anglican clergy remained here. So when and how did Old North reopen? Well, in July 1776, as the colonies formally declared their independence, a Church of England minister named Stephen Lewis set sail for North America as a chaplain in General Burgoyne's regiment of light dragoons. Their ship was captured by the Americans, with the captain and Reverend Lewis and the troops held prisoner. Lewis was shuttled back and forth from New York to New England under house arrest. He eventually expressed his desire to switch sides and swear an oath of allegiance to the United States. We're not entirely sure of his reasons for defecting. Some thought he was actually a spy for England. He claimed that he and many English were simply tired of the war, with inadequate food and shelter and support from home. Some women who met the Reverend Lewis in New York were convinced that the real reason he changed sides was because of a strong love interest here in Boston. Whatever the case, by August of 1778, he was trusted enough to be set free. As one of very few Anglican clergy, especially here in New England, he was hired as the third rector of Christ Church in Boston, finally allowing the church to reopen. The Reverend Lewis's story is interesting enough in his desire to support the American cause and make a new home on this side of the Atlantic. But he's significant in another respect as well, because in the first reference to Lewis in our vestry records, dated March 1779, we read that a vote was taken authorizing him to, quote, prepare a proper form of prayer for the Congress of the United States, for the several states, and for their success in the present important contest, to be read daily in the church. It was later reported on more than one occasion by the rector of Trinity Church in Boston that Lewis was the first clergyman to make alterations to the liturgy so as to accommodate what he called the present rulers. As of 1781, no other Episcopal clergy in New England had done so. Thus, Lewis led the way in composing prayers for the new nation and solidifying our position as an icon of American history and as a house of prayer for all people. We don't know much more about Stephen Lewis, but his story provides a fascinating glimpse into the War of Independence on both the American and English sides. His story and the church's reminds us of how divided people and communities were, especially communities of faith. And we begin to see how our parishioners and clergy looked to the future, shining beacons of light and hope for a new nation.